I'm Jared Craig with the Vet Voice on behalf of Veterans for America First. I have the pleasure of speaking with our national spokesperson, Admiral Charles Kubic today, and a retired Navy SEAL, Craig Sawyer, who is got a hands-on approach with a lot of the human trafficking issues that we're seeing today. So I want to first say welcome to the show and thank you for making time to be on the podcast today.
Well, it's my pleasure to join you today for this hopefully robust discussion.
It's a pleasure for me as well. Looking forward to it.
Well, Admiral, I had the pleasure of meeting you in person in Virginia a couple of weeks ago while I was on the tour up the East Coast, and we were there with a lot of common interests. And going forward, looking into the 2024 election, we've got a lot of moving parts. So, Craig, I've done a little bit of research on your background, and it is extensive. So, because y'all have so much service in your history, Admiral, could you please explain to our viewers and listeners a little bit about your history and interaction with the border and the issues that are related to the border?
It'd be my pleasure. By education, I'm an engineer, civil structural engineer, and by profession, I was a Navy Civil Engineer Corps officer, a United States Navy Seabee. And Craig, towards the end of my career, I also became an honorary frogman, but I can't talk about all the dope deals that I did to earn that distinction. And again, served all over the world, ultimately commanded the Seabee division with 16,000 Seabees when we basically liberated Iraq, and also served in Afghanistan, but started my career in Vietnam and worked my way through to the fall of Baghdad. After that, I was a president of an international construction company working in Iraq, Afghanistan, out in the Pacific. Until about 10 years ago, I took an early retirement from them and opened my own engineering company, Kubic Engineer Group. During the 2016 election, then candidate Trump asked me to serve as one of his national security policy advisors, put my business on hold during that period. Then afterwards formed a kind of a team with a Texas construction company and a number of subcontractors, and basically built 145 miles of border wall in all 4 states, in California, in Arizona, New Mexico, and in Texas. We got 145 miles done, which was about 5 more than the target that then President Trump set for us. There were 4 companies to build about 450 miles. We did 145. We had 167 under contract when current President Joe Biden shut us down. Have a lot of experience working down there, not only the building but with the people, and understanding the situation there and the thin green line that our Border Patrol is forming. So as the national spokesman for Veterans for America First, I did a number of trips down there, a number of town halls and church assembly meetings, and then also some assemblies down at the border, where we emphasized the fact that not only did Joe Biden shut down the border, but he just left gaps in it that could have been completed very, very quickly. But it was almost malice aforethought to leave openings in the border where we continue to become just under siege. And we can talk a little bit more about some of the dynamics that are going on down there, and some of the collaborators who basically are aiding and abetting the drug and human traffickings down there. So that's kind of a quick thumbnail of where we are currently serving with Veterans for America First, as well as we still are quietly working in a few spots down at the border, but we can talk about that if we need to as well. But over to you, Craig.
Right on. Well, thanks for your service, Admiral, and everything that you're still contributing to our national security and the American citizens' best interest. It's a crazy time to witness what's happening. For me, I grew up just north of Houston. I spent most of my military career. I started off in the Marine Corps, and then I went to the Navy to serve as a Navy SEAL, and served at SEAL Team 1, and got picked up after operations in Desert Shield, Desert Storm for DevGru. So I served at the highest level of counter-terrorist operations there. And then I did 5 years of federal law enforcement and ended up being a national security whistleblower. When presented with some corruption, there was a high-ranking SES level executive from the top of one of our federal law enforcement agencies. And they did fire him for gross mismanagement, exactly what I'd reported him for, but not before he was allowed to retaliate against my family to such a degree that I signed my resignation under duress and walked away from everything. I had my Navy career, decorated for heroic service in combat, and nothing but awards for superior contribution in that and my federal law enforcement until that day. But it was the right decision. And so I did walk away from everything I'd worked toward, a retirement, a pension or benefits or anything like that. So then I did a decade of high threat mobile security for the Department of State and the intelligence community, moving our highest ranking diplomats around in the war zones to try to keep them off of Al Jazeera and the evening news as a statistic. And then I started doing some film and television, trying to be home more, and ended up learning about child trafficking. So I founded Veterans for Child Rescue in an effort to compromise the enemy's mission. And when I say the enemy's mission, I mean child trafficking in the form of a domestic covert operation run at industrial scale inside the continental United States. And I realized through friends of mine who were literally legends in the national security space, admirals, generals, people like Jack Farmer who know what's going on, who runs what. I was able to chat with them and honestly pray over it as well as to what I wanted to do. And I realized exposing it was the biggest contribution I could make to all of those that I care about. So we spent 3 years filming Contraland, a documentary that's a powerful expose. And we continue to run joint operations with federal and local law enforcement, arresting child predators, exposing it in every way that we can. And that's what we do. So we've run some joint operations with different agencies down on the border in southern Texas, southern Arizona, Zapata, Laredo, Texas. We've run sting operations there, 100% conviction rate on the predators we've caught. And just trying to combat it to whatever degree I can as just a busted up veteran and father now. You know, I don't have DOD assets on call that I can get on the radio and call in F-18s and and make war against this the way I did once upon a time. But I can do what I can do right now. And so that's what Vets for Child Rescue is all about, is we the people and veterans just trying to stand up and make the country safer for the little ones who can't defend themselves.
Well, thank you both for your service. I've been hearing this number for 2022 that supposedly we've only had 3 million illegal aliens come across the southern border. Do you believe that number is higher or lower? First, starting with Admiral Kubic. Do you believe that that's an accurate number?
Well, first of all, people, I think, some are confused, some are playing games, with the numbers, because you have to put a time frame on it. Are we talking about, which year period? Is it talking about a year, a month, whatever? And you have to talk about the various categories that you have. We have people who come across, some of which are still sent back, some of which who are basically brought into the interior, and we have some that come across on their own, that got away and get away. My guess is if you took all of those people who crossed illegally at some point, my guess is the number is somewhere between 7 and 10 million. If you talk about the people who are here and theoretically are under asylum being processed, you're probably closer then in the range of the 2 to 3 million. But if you talk about the amount of people who have tried to, come here and got away, and you add that together, I think that's about where you get the 5 million number. But I haven't been able to really sort all of that out, because you have to decide what you're talking about. What we should be talking about are the people who are still here illegally in the United States. And I think that number, at one point in time, we said there were 11 million before all of this stuff started happening during the Biden administration. It's probably, that number is probably getting closer to 20 million, as we sit here. And the question is, where are they? You know, the children that are coming across, all of that, where do they go? Where are they living? All of them have to have a place to sleep. They have to have food. They have to have some sort of income. And they've just disappeared in our country, you know, and we don't know where they are. We know in New York, they built a, what, $660,000 tent to put them in. The people wouldn't stay there. So now they're staying in $400 a night hotel rooms. But this is happening everywhere, and we don't really know, and it doesn't seem to be anybody investigating it. We do know what's happening at the border, and we do know who's aiding and abetting, but that's a different story. But when you talk numbers, I think it's huge, and we can expect at some point in time, all of those folks, or a good portion of them, will be organized such that then they'll start to demand more. They'll start to demand more rights. They'll start to demand to vote. They're going to start to have all sorts of demands politically, and they'll start to get advocates. And so it's only a matter of time before that starts happening. But right now, I doubt that even DHS knows how many people are in the United States illegally.
Yeah, I think it's hard to know what we don't know. So
Right.
As you understand, building the walls is half the problem. The other half is manning the border and handling the human influx as opposed to just the physical barrier. And Craig,
Well, let me tell you, when we built in San Diego, between San Diego and Tijuana, we built a double wall, you know, from the Pacific Ocean into the mountains. And the first wall, and some of this was on 65% grades. And, you know, that's more than a double diamond, you know, ski slope. But it was an 18-foot wall, 3 feet off the border. But then we had about a 150-foot entrapment area with sensors in it. And then we built a 30-foot wall, you know, there, and that had cameras and lights. And so when we finished and put that last panel in place, and that had been one of the biggest, busiest areas in the country coming across, Border Patrol told me the day we put the last panel in place, they were able to transfer 126 agents to other duties because that stopped them. And even though you might say when you got up into the mountains there was a little bit of a gap there, some of that terrain is so rugged and it's so difficult to get there. All you have to do is put a spotter or use drones and you can get it. The original plan was to build about 700 miles. And the feeling was that if we had 700 miles and we would channel people to where it was, you know, almost impossible to get through, we could basically cut the incursions down to almost nothing. And we've got of that 700 miles, we got 455 done, but there's still gaps. Now the Border Patrol will still patrol in those gaps and trying to shut them down. But when you want to get into the aiding and abetting and who's profiting from this, you know, we can talk about why it doesn't stop and why it is actually accelerating.
And that's the question that I think a lot of people have is who benefits from this porous border?
The one thing that shocked me, you know, we were down there when Mayra Flores was campaigning when she first announced her candidacy, and we were so proud of her winning, and then she gets beat. And then we see a couple of other people on there getting beat. And I'm asking myself, what's happening? Well, if you go into McAllen, you know, and you go into the shopping mall in McAllen on a Sunday night, it is packed. If you look at the hotels, if you look at the food services, everybody in that border area, although they're impacted by it, there's a lot of profiting going on. Somebody has to prepare meals. Somebody has to drive the buses. Somebody has to have the temporary hotel, you know, places. And there are people there, of course, who are doing things on the illegal side. So there's a very, you know, good job market there. There's very good opportunities. And where that's happening is that the federal government is kind of outsourcing that by taking money and pushing it into these NGOs, whether it be Catholic Charities or others, particularly in the Rio Grande Valley, it's the Catholic Charities. And they, quote, nonprofits are making huge amount of money, which they're paying huge salaries to their own people. And what you begin to see is it used to be that the cartels, you know, had to do the whole supply chain of human trafficking. They had to collect the people in Mexico, push them across, meet them on the other side covertly, move them to the interior, and then get them to wherever they were going to be exploited. And now what happened was we created a push-pull. Not only do we have the cartel pushing people over, we have them being pulled, you know, by the NGOs who now are basically taking them, and they're taking the middle part of that supply chain. They're picking them up, they're cleaning them up, they're getting them, you know, tickets, they're moving them to wherever. And then as soon as they get there, because most of them, you're paying somewhere in the range of $8,000 to $10,000 to come across, where they put 50% down. And then once they come across, they still owe the other 50% to the cartel. And then they're put into places where as soon as they show up in one of these stash houses, they're basically told, here's what your room costs per day, here's what your meals cost per day. You want a bottle of water, it's $1. And they basically get them into the cycle where they can never really pay off their whole debt. And again, that to me is getting worse. And it may, in some, I'm just speculating here, it may go to some reason why there's now somewhat of a popularity of this, because the cartels have polished their image as well. They have become kind of a boutique travel agency where they are now basically collecting these people from all over the world. And even was down there, earlier in the year when we went out at night. And by the way, when you go out at night with the Border Patrol to see what's happening, you go armed, because it is dangerous out there. But you begin to see that the Border Patrol being spread thin, the tactic at one time was to mob them over at one place with people and then bring the drugs either upstream or downstream across. What they're doing now is, and that big great strain on the Border Patrol, because as soon as they get like 50 people across, they'd either have to extend shifts or they'd have to bring people in off shift to be able to process these folks. So what the cartel did was they conducted liaison with the Border Patrol. They now are calling the Border Patrol and saying, you'll have 25 people at La Jolla at midnight, and therefore you can set your shift accordingly so you can process them. And the Border Patrol had gotten into the business of not protecting the border, but seeing how efficient they could process it. And when Mayorkas says the border is secure, no one's getting through, he means at the port of entry. Every place else, they're coming through in droves. And when he means solving the problem, his problem is processing them quicker. And so there's all kinds of a spin on the language there. But I think what we have is a system where we actually have, Catholic charities, other religious charities, other NGOs aiding and abetting the drug and human trafficking that Craig is trying to prevent. And what we're finding, and I'll sum it up quickly, here in Virginia, in fact, one of our rural counties just outside of the Capital Beltway area, Culpeper County, the sheriff there, Sheriff Jenkins, is basically discovered that the distressed properties, homes, things where there's a divorce sale or the estate sale or it's run down, were being bought up either by the charities or by the NGOs, and they were being moved into rural areas in the stash houses. They were running the human trafficking out of there. And he and his deputies, raided one of these, and actually it got into a pretty fierce gun battle where they basically killed the traffickers, which was a step forward. But that's why the threat is everywhere. They're spreading across the country. We don't know where they are or how they're doing it. Maybe Craig has some insight into that. All I know is these kids and people are being pulled across by the NGOs who are there to receive them, and they're working hand in hand with the cartel, unfortunately.
Well, I think that one thing that you brought up was the indentured servitude. When the illegal aliens come here and they still owe the coyotes, they still owe their freedom to the cartels and the different organizations here on the state side is perpetuating slavery as I see it. And, there's sex slaves, there's human trafficking for labor, there's all kinds of different, human trafficking angles. But when we have children being exploited, being brought across, and I understand, Craig, your organization, Vets for Child Rescue, you're doing a lot of good things to combat the abuse of children in this mechanism.
Yeah, that's the entire intent behind V4CR. And I agree with the Admiral. When you have a forfeiture of control on your border, you lose your sovereignty, because then we're left to speculate on what the numbers actually are. You forfeit your security. We surrender that.
Yeah, Craig,
globally. Go ahead.
So one of the things I haven't figured out yet is that we have all of these economic refugees and people coming back, they're being facilitated, but for some reason, the Biden administration says if you're from Venezuela, you can't come across. We know that's an area where people are actually trying to escape communism, and they know that they rationalize it by saying, well, these people are being dumped out of the jails. Well, my guess is, and I don't know this for a fact, they're in jail because they were political prisoners, and similar to what we have still in the District of Columbia. And so I can't understand why someone who is fleeing communism for sure and is truly a refugee is being denied coming in, where people who are coming here, at the hands of the cartel are being welcomed with open arms. Possibly the people fleeing communism might become Republican voters rather than Democrat voters. I don't know, but that's a mystery to me as to why that's happening. And they are able to enforce it with Venezuelans, but not with people from Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador.
Admiral, I'm confident you've seen the same dynamic from the Department of State fighting our interpreters and other assets from the war zones who have helped American forces.
Yeah, I'm working with two of them, trying to get them in right now that are actually hiding out in Pakistan, being hunted by the Haqqani network. That we're trying to get them, here in the United States, and the amount of paperwork that the State Department is doing and the obstructions is just atrocious.
Yeah, so to watch our own Department of State fight those who have dedicated their lives and sacrificed, in a lot of cases, their families, who got burned through mismanagement, fight them tooth and nail to keep them from coming here and gaining their citizenship when millions are pouring across our borders, our abandoned border in so many aspects. Mm-hmm. It's demoralizing. And that's the intent. When talking to a lot of my friends in federal law enforcement and even local, they feel like their teeth have been taken from them in the enforcement of their duties. They feel like, Craig, I feel like I'm not able to defend my nation. I feel like I've been reduced to like a travel guide or a flight attendant. I'm to assist the people into my country illegally and make sure that they're comfortable and safe and expedite the process. And we even have contracting companies who are known to contract to the intelligence community, covertly flying children from the southern border in southern Texas into private airfields in other states, deep into the United States in the dark of night, like a Mina Airfield, Arkansas, covert narcotics drug drop. Mm-hmm. And when Jen Psaki is asked about it, point blank, she says, we're talking early flights, earlier than you and I might like to take, but basically, what's your problem? Like there's no nothing wrong there. Well, look, my point is, look, a friend of mine that served in the intelligence community in the Marine Corps as an officer prior to that has had surveillance in some of these small airfields, and these government contracted aircraft are coming in with tail numbers that are listed under companies that have been out of business for years. Mm. One company that contracts to the CIA that I know about specifically, I've contracted through that company to that client in years past for a protection operation. So it begs some questions when the flights are landing from Harlingen, from Laredo into these small airfields at 3 a.m. when it's illegal to land there after midnight, right? And with tail numbers that are illegal, and with the contents listed as cargo rather than souls, and 20 or 30 children at a time get off and are put into privately owned vehicles with no apparent government oversight or checks of identification, no parents seemingly there, shoved into into POVs in large numbers, jammed in there like cordwood, and then exiting these airfields. That begs a hard question of, if these are children being reunited with their biological parents, wouldn't that be something you'd want to do in the light of day? Shouldn't that be something that we would all celebrate? Because they're all God's children. I don't care where they come from. Why is this handled like a covert operation, like a narcotics drop? And what's becoming of these children?
And the other thing is that the average public and even the average officials that are complicit in all this never see the faces of the kids. You know, I can remember being right around midnight at La Jolla, and there was a large group that came across, but in there were probably maybe 15 kids. Looked to be like they were high school age, maybe junior high age. And, you know, I speak a little bit of Spanish, and I went up and started to talk to them. They were all freezing cold and terrified. And, you know, I was asking them how they were doing, and then I asked them their ages. They were about, you know, 15, 16, 17 is what they said. I asked them if any of them were brothers. There were two sets of brothers there. There was a little girl who was there who probably, she didn't want to talk to anybody. And I went and kind of talked softly to her, was able to get her to tell me that she was 12 years old. And it looked to me like she was in a state of total shock, like she had probably been molested or whatever, it was just cowering there. And then I started asking them, "Donde está su mamá y papá?" You know, where's your mother and father? And they just, even these boys who were pretty good strapping lads, the eyes just teared up. They looked down, shook their heads, and wouldn't answer. They have no idea where their parents are, what they're doing. And when you see that human face on it, you realize, you know, how criminal, you know, this behavior is. And what they were doing with them is they would take them, you know, to the nearest sector headquarters of the Border Patrol, and basically process them, check them, do whatever they could to try to confirm who they were, where they were going, clean them up, and then turn them over to Catholic Charities. And the next day they'd be on American Airlines, you know, headed to, you know, wherever to be sent further into the interior. And I'm wondering, Craig, do you find, you and your group, when they finally get spread out into the country, is there any kind of an intelligence network that says where these kids are? They've all had some sort of identification entered into, quote, the system. And I don't know if anybody even has the ability to follow up once they're dropped off. Do we know where these kids are, where they're being trafficked? Can we basically go in and raid the areas that are happening there, or do we not even know where they are?
We don't know enough about what's becoming of these children, and I won't say too much on what's coming, but we will learn. We will learn pretty soon what's becoming of them, because again, they're all God's children. They can't defend themselves. We see so many of these quote unquote family units are literally just people coming across with some child that they've got, or children that they've gotten from cartel, and they're to bring them across and pose as a family unit. Law enforcement are confiding in us that they're not adequately trained or supported up the chain of command on separating and questioning and getting to the bottom of whether or not this child brought across the border is part of this biological family unit. The rapid DNA tests have been abandoned. So there's apparently no more intent on determining whether or not the child is safe and with their biological parent. We're just going to pretend like we believe you and just expedite. We're going to rush it across.
Yeah.
And so there's really a lack of comprehension of who's coming across and in what capacity now, that the volume is just too high. And then even you've got cartel setting 18-wheelers on fire in Mexico, on the Mexican side of the border, starting these long traffic jams to create this pressure on Border Patrol to expedite, and just, you know, the miles and miles of 18-wheelers honking the horns and hours going by, and then just rushing people across to try to catch up. Well, then who knows what all are in those loads coming across, because you can't process them all effectively when you're in a mad rush and there's a crisis. So our enemies, if you will, the Mexican drug cartels and others, they've learned how to exploit the weaknesses in our national intent to have control over our border. And it's just a mess down there. And again, local and federal law enforcement are demoralized. So many of them have been chased out of their jobs, or they've walked away out of frustration. It's a mess. It's a mess. And anybody that claims that there's control or safety down there is lying through their teeth. There's no nice verbiage to put on it.
Yeah.
You talk to anybody that's serving in any capacity in law enforcement down on the border, and they'll tell you about all the distraction tactics that's being utilized now. They'll send a group over in one location, and because law enforcement are spread so thin, multiple agencies, federal and local, will respond to a group that's sprinting across a certain portion of the border. And then there'll be a lot larger group upstream or downstream, so to speak, that come across. And that was the intent all along. So a ruse, a distraction in one location, and then a much bigger group comes through with impunity in another location. So it's just this whack-a-mole kind of scenario that our law enforcement, if allowed to enforce the way that they knew how, could control it. The Admiral will testify to this. Our nation can draw a square just about anywhere on earth and dominate and control that square.
Yep.
And we're trying to say we can't control our own border. Well, it's just because we don't have the national will due to a failure in leadership. There is not the will to control it, and it's against the best interest of every American citizen. All of those who have migrated here honorably and legally previously, they're insulted by it. They are robbed from it just the same as the rest of us. And it's not about race. It's not about anything else. It's about security and control and an orderly process by which honorable people migrate. There's a way to do that. And right now, all that's been abandoned and we're being flooded. It's an assisted invasion. The federal government is assisting it. We can observe that and measure that. So what do we do about it? And we just have to.
And it's more than just an invasion in quotes. It's an actual invasion. When you go down there, and I've been down there with the night vision goggles, night vision scope, and looking at the other side, as they're bringing them across, there are, armed, cartel members over there controlling these crossing points. And they've got, the old M16 long rifles. They haven't upgraded M4s yet, but they're over with that. And they fight with each other. I mean, I've been down there at night, early morning when you start hearing 50 caliber machine guns going off. They're over there with heavy weapons, fighting for their own territory. And it's gotten so sophisticated that if you pay your deposit, there was one guy that came across, he was probably late 40s, early 50s, been shot in the leg. And we were looking to get him, medical care. And what they do is they give them their wristbands. And the wristband allows them 3 tries to cross in that area where that sector controls it. If they come across and they get sent back, they get another try. And once the Border Patrol did figure that out, they started cutting the wristbands off. So this guy's wristband got cut off. He went over. The next night he tried to come back. They found him and they shot him. And he got across, he was escaping across. And so it really is an armed operation on that side. And it makes you wonder if they've got armed people on their side. I'm talking Rio Grande River now, down in La Jolla, in Rio Grande City, up, and some of the other places along the river. If they've got armed people on their side, and why can't we put an armed resistance, on our side of the border? Or better yet, years ago when we had the Haitian migrant crisis, in the follow-up of that, Department of Defense actually created in Guantanamo Bay a migrant camp. Everybody knows that on one side of the island, we have the prison where the Al-Qaeda and all those folks were. On what we call the leeward side, where the airfield is, there is a camp that over the years has been improved that has the capability to house comfortably about 20,000 migrants. There's a joint task force of 900 reservists that can be called up to man it. And even so, we probably have about 40 or 50 people that have either come down the Guantanamo River or whatever and are there as migrants. I venture to say that if somebody came across the river and they were told they had a choice, they could go back or they could go to Guantanamo Bay, they wouldn't know the difference. They wouldn't want to go to Guantanamo Bay. But if we put people there, if we made it, less comfortable, for them, I don't know that people would even take the cartel up on coming here. They know that they're going to get treated well when they come across because of the collaboration that's going on.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I've spoken to many candidates all up and down the East Coast, and even when I ran for office, I found the upsetting issue with the border was we already have laws in place that are being ignored. We already have mechanisms, facilities, infrastructure to handle this problem in a responsible way, a humane way, and the right way. And it's just being ignored, underfunded, and people are, their authority has been taken away. You mentioned their teeth have been, filed down, that they don't, the border security have turned into tour guides or kind of like substitute teachers, sitting at the border and just stamping hands as they come across. And we have the mechanisms there, and it's infuriating that the attitude of the American, I'll just say current administration, is that that's just something we have to live with. So Craig, you've dealt with the rescuing children that have been part of the human trafficking. Veterans for America First, we have had several other candidates that we've supported and endorsed, including Saria Ivy, who's rescued hundreds of kids over the past 10 years. We've got candidates and we've got spokespeople that are more than just lip service to this issue, that have had years of actual investment of their time and effort to save these children from predators, to save volatile and fragile people from the cartels, the coyotes. And it's unsettling, and I think that it's more unsettling that it's being hidden by the mainstream media, that we're perpetuating sex slaves, we're perpetuating slavery in general, from labor camps to indentured servitude. So what's the next step here? You kind of hinted towards, we're going to find out where they are domestically, but what's the next step to hold those who are not doing their job accountable now?
Well, I was blessed to be able to speak in the Texas Capitol building to some of the Senate and Congress reps there just over a month ago. And what I told them was my intent was to create a scorecard for them, not only for them, but for anybody that we, the people, elect into position like judges, DAs, attorneys general, any elected official that serves, that's supposed to be a servant of we the people. How are you doing for the children on the grooming of them in schools? Are you on board with teaching 5-year-old children how to have all sorts of perverted sex acts that they don't have any business knowing or dealing with or seeing for many years to come? Or are you on the children's side protecting them against that? Are you doing anything to strengthen the protections for children? Are you doing anything to increase the penalties for the predators? If you're not, or if you say, I don't know, or I haven't done anything, that's a failing scorecard. We mean to vote you out and replace you with someone who will. We need true servant leaders in these positions. And we, the people, have failed to get actively involved and fulfill our civic duty to stand up for the little ones in this regard and make sure we get people in office that are going to serve in good faith. So many of them have betrayed us. We see through FTX now with the cryptocurrency, through Ukraine, the whole money laundering cycle of how one side of the aisle politically sells out the American people and the other side of the aisle lets them. And we've got to start scoring them on how they're performing on key issues that we care about. And the border and the children is something that a lot of them aren't really being held to account on. And I think that's something to answer your question on what comes next. That's something that we can do. And we're devising this scorecard concept as we speak with those that have worked in the federal government and legislation to help craft that as a tool and use it as leverage in good faith for the best interest of we the people and the defenseless.
Well, a lot of the people that I'm talking about are people who have set oaths. They've raised their hand and they put their hand on their left hand on the Bible, and they've made oaths to uphold the laws of this country, of the United States, at every level, and they're ignoring their oaths.
Yeah, but Jared, so many of them are on video raping children. I'm sorry. If you look at Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's intelligence collecting operation, which was what it was, they and many others worldwide invite and target elected officials and public figures down to their islands, their mansions, their resorts, where they have every manner of debauchery available. And these reprobates follow their nose, they get drunk, they get high, they do whatever, and they end up in a back master bedroom that's all wired with covert cameras, because that's why this is being put on. And they have sex with underage children or do whatever it is that they're inclined to do, because again, it's all made available to them in these places. That's the intent. And then they serve not we the people anymore, Jared, but they serve whoever holds that video of them. It's compromise. They're done. And even if their intent was to serve we the people, they can't anymore. So that's why character, moral character, is so important for elected officials, because that's the only thing that's going to cause them to act in good faith when nobody's looking, when they can get away with it. So that's something we have to realize, is some of these people, they're moral reprobates. They have no standards. They're a lot of them perverts, and there's all sorts of skeletons they have in their closet. So we really have to get wise at our vetting process and get quality people in who have led lives of honor. And it's not that we require them to be saints, but my God, they have to be able not to be blackmailed into betraying us all and selling us out.
Well, Admiral, we just mentioned the Epstein Island, and I think most of the people are not naive enough to think that that's an isolated island, an isolated circle, but more of a peek into the over the hill as to a larger industry. I've interviewed people talking about the Haitian human trafficking with the orphanages and the missionary tourism that's perpetuating the abuse of children overseas on other islands. But, you know, for our watchers or our listeners, could you explain from your contacts and your experience how big of a rampant problem this is in our borders, and additional to beyond our borders?
Yes, I think that you know, Craig has hit it in its stark reality. I think the reason we don't know where all these kids are is they are being trafficked, they are being hidden, they are being pushed you know, into darkness. And there is a good versus evil element to this, and there are people who have been entrapped, you know, in evil. And they then are the ones who tend to wrap themselves in virtue and project the evil onto others as they operate in a political environment. But I just think that again, this is another area where we collectively have to call, you know, veterans to be the voice of the community, that they need to stand tall. They need to be the person who speaks up, particularly if there's a hint of this happening in their community. They need to be the ones when they pass the basket in church, you know, to collect for Catholic Charities or these other groups, that they basically, you know, tell people to pass it by. And again, until we can get people who believe it, who understand it, otherwise it's hidden. And the politicians who basically keep it hidden, you know, are good at what they do. So my sense is that, again, kind of radical, but I think we could go as far, if we had the collective will in our country, to pass a declaration of war on the drug cartel. And I think we could basically, you know, I don't know about you, Craig, but I'd be up for putting a 10-mile, you know, zone on the other side of the border that nobody comes through, and basically just you know, make it very, very painful for the cartel, and to do it legitimately, and to basically hopefully get the Mexican government to back us. But they're in such entrenched, even in the Mexican government, and they are so violent that it would not be a pretty thing. But I think we're going to get to the point where, unless we take a stand to, number one, speak out in our communities, to get the public, the voters, to understand how important this issue is. They kind of almost ignored it in this recent election. And until we get the collective will to take the cartel on, and necessarily, even if we have to run black ops, you know, there to shut them down, until we can do that, these kids are going to suffer, and they're going to suffer continuously, and they're going to suffer horribly. So I am just particularly upset about all of the money that's being funneled through the NGOs and the charities to do this, and how they got to the point where they're probably liquored up on this money and they just want to keep it going, and they're all part of the problem. They may be the biggest part of the problem at this point.
Yes, sir. That gravy train is intoxicating for many, and we can observe that.
Yeah.
There are right fighters, if you'll call them, in Texas, fighting for legislation to designate the Mexican drug cartels as terrorists,
right?
As international terrorists. That's how they're functioning.
That should be easy.
So anybody who's acting in good faith and on behalf of the best interests of the American people should sign on to that, because that legislation unlocks an entire war chest,
right,
of assets and tools that the Admiral knows well, and all of my colleagues know well. That changes everything. That gets the cartel drug runners and human traffickers hunted down and eradicated, like the terrorists that they are, eradicated against our best and most powerful
like
assets.
That, Greg, I can see a 50 caliber emplacement up on the bluff there at Roma. And just periodically, when you see these guys over there, just kind of spray the center line of the river and just let them know they're not crossing, you know.
Oh, I mean, we could have Spectre up overhead. There's all kinds of, I mean, just absolute annihilation of these terrorists.
Until we basically put them at risk in their operation. Like I said, they are sophisticated travel agents, and the Border Patrol, to their, you know, they don't really have any choice because of what you said about how their people get spread out and pulled in different directions. They have readily kind of agreed to this contact with the cartel, where they get notification of who's coming across where, so they can at least adjust their shifts to put people there to cover them, so they don't have to pull people from another spot. And so it's become a cooperative venture, which is just sickening. But the Border Patrol has told me they have to do it. They were running their agents ragged. Their families were seeing, you know, somebody who had a shift that was over at midnight, not coming until 3, people being called out early for shift because of this, you know, sporadic places up and down the river. And so they're actually been caught into this, and that's affecting their morale as well, because they are not, you know, Border Patrol anymore. They're kind of like, you know, the welcoming committee at this point in time. And it's difficult.
If whether you call it Gen 5 warfare or whatever, we do see and we can measure that there is a globalist cabal orchestrating this.
Right.
They're bringing huge funding into the politicians that bring about that agenda, which is in direct contrast, is counter to the best interest of the American citizens. And the drug cartels are playing into that. So until we can gain the national will to solve this and bring about such assets and SOPs, then it's not going to change. Those who want it this way are the ones that are ultimately in control. So we have to restore power back to the working class, to the American citizens whose best interests need to be served. So we see the Admiral talked about funding. Look, we see global funding being brought in to fund the campaigns of judges, district attorneys, and attorneys general now. That is in direct conflict with the best interest of the American citizens. We're talking about the refusal of these judges to prosecute entire categories of crimes, including child rape and child trafficking. How on earth is not a glaring conflict of interest? How is that not illegal for a globalist billionaire like George Soros to fund the campaigns of judges with the agreement that they will not prosecute child sex and child trafficking crimes? My God, how are we allowing that? And it's measurable. It's not speculation that this is happening. This is widely known and admitted. So where are we? We're in the position of having forfeited the game field to our opponent, and we have to roll up our sleeves and get back in there.
Well, I've heard George Soros started off with funding DAs, and the DAs are who choose what crimes are prosecuted. But with Veterans for America First being ambassadors and spokespeople, I think we're calling out a lot, or shedding a lot of light on this by endorsing certain candidates for state and federal levels and keep the speech going. Vladimir Lemets is one of the founders of Veterans for Trump, currently known as Veterans for America First now. And I would invite him to come on, and he's wanted to give a background as to the history of Veterans for Trump and how we've evolved to where we are today. So, Vlad, are you available to do that summary?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Thank you, Jared. I appreciate it. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Good.
All right. Listen, a great interview. I really appreciate some of the points you gentlemen made. And I want to actually bring a couple of them. And Craig, when you said about some of the people that are getting elected and there's a lot of dirt on them, you know, this is, as much as I despise saying this, this is on both sides of the aisle. And some time ago, you rightfully pointed out a guy in in 27th, I believe it is, district, Brian Mast, remember them?
Okay.
Yeah, to that end, you know, I was one of the first people who was saying there's absolutely no way we can endorse Brian Mast, even though, you know, we've received requests, you know, and some of the people that, you know, even on Trump team, they've asked for his endorsement. And I was saying, if we are to stand for something in this community, this is absolutely not the kind of people we should be endorsing. So we have endorsed over 200 people in this election cycle alone. But rest assured that every single one of them has gone through a rigorous vetting process, and they had to raise their right hand and re-uphold the oath of office. And we are planning on keeping all of them accountable as much to our ability to do so. But to that end, I wanted to actually touch on why the interview between you, Admiral, and you, Craig, has been very important to me in particular. When Veterans for America First, at the time Veterans for Trump organization got started, it was 2 weeks after Trump announced he was running for office. And that was at the time when everybody was dropping him and saying, oh my God, Trump is racist, you know, he is xenophobic, he believes all the immigrants are rapists, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the time to where I have asked a friend of mine who I served in Iraq with, who was at the time serving as a Border Patrol agent. And I've asked him, well, I said, Jim, is this true, what they're saying? I mean, is what Trump is saying, and do we have such a big problem at the border? And he tells me, well, Vlad, I invite you to come over and visit. It actually is much worse than he's saying. And we do have people coming through the border who are from the Middle East. And, you know, we hear the language, but we have no idea who they are. And they do come, you know, in droves, and they are bringing a lot of women and children who don't look like they belong in the situation. So that was the very beginning of our organization. So that was the issue that made us actually pay attention to what is happening with then candidate Trump. So, you know, to that end, you're saying something about a scorecard. That is a brilliant idea. I would like to work with you and your team on that specifically, because this is something that we have been working along lines of. When we are endorsing candidates, there's been a certain criteria and a certain parameters and a certain promises we make them, you know, give us, and we intend to uphold them responsible to those till the end. So, but that was just, you know, a very interesting portion about this. So I would like to conclude just my little shout out to you guys. And again, thank you for being a part of this interview. Thank you for being a part of our team. Craig, you've been our ambassador for a very long time. We have met together for the first time, I believe it was Michael Terrell was there. God bless his soul. He passed away recently. He was a huge supporter of our veterans, by the way.
Yeah, it was Rafa Conde's event.
Yeah, that's
in
right.
Miami.
That's right. Men of War, I believe, stuff
Yes.
over there as well.
Yeah,
That's
good guys.
right. Absolutely. But I want to just conclude my little portion here with just stating something that Admiral keeps saying, and it's very dear to my heart specifically, is we as veteran community, we need to stand up. We need to be the voices in our community. We have, many of us, been through tough situations, and we know what leadership looks like. So unless we stand up and we provide leadership in our communities, it doesn't look like the people in charge are wanting us to do that, and that they are going to provide leadership that is needed. To that end, I actually encourage different businesses and people who are conservative in general to support our veterans and our first responders as well, and prompt them to stand up and be leaders in our community. One of the small projects like this is, Craig, I was bringing up to your guy Forrest, is Veterans Business Bureau. It's just a small project that is specifically designed for veterans and first responders, and it points out different businesses and nonprofits and organizations all over the country that are geared towards helping them. So, and I know I spoke to Forrest, and he told me that, you'd work with us on that project and be an ambassador for that as well. So I thank you for that. We definitely need people to get involved, in veteran and first responder community, because unless we get involved now, the shining city on the hill is not going to be so shiny anymore. And I believe we're at the pivotal moment. So again, I appreciate and honor all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think Forrest Sealey said he needed a couple of minutes portion to speak to some of the issues we're discussing. Are you there?
Oh, yes, sir. Can y'all hear? In essence, there's 2 points that I wanted to interject here. Number one, Peter Nygaard was another Jeffrey Epstein. He was up in Canada, and he's awaiting to his jail term. And there's a couple of podcasts you can listen to him, what he was doing, but it's the exact same thing. And one thing that I want to also add, Craig and I have talked about this to some degree, and we've always asked, why is it that we keep getting the same rinse and repeat from our policymakers? There's always that new and upcoming person that we elect, and 90% of what he does or she does is what is expected. And then there's that one really important issue, and then they vote opposite. And then we try within that bubble to figure out what that is, why they do that. And so what I've concluded in my meditation, praying and such, that child trafficking is a currency of the world. It's the most valuable currency. And what's happening is, as a policymaker, you sit in a position as it pertains to that currency. You're either ignoring it, you are benefiting, you're participating, or you're being leveraged. And until we remove that currency, it's rinse and repeat. So yes, we do need to have elected officials that are going to be righteous and do what they put their hand on the Bible to do. But we have got to destroy the currency, or we're going to continue fighting. It's like swimming upstream, like the salmon trying to get to the end of the river. So anyway, those are the 2 points I'd like to interject into this conversation.
Well, Vlad, you talked about leadership, and that's where veterans can come in, because we're trained in leadership. We have to exercise it to make war in defense of our nation. And so much of the American civilian populace has been beat down through the hostile tool of political correctness into forfeiting their moral courage and not dare speaking the truth and speaking up for themselves and for the defenseless. And we have to recognize that as a psychological weapon that it is. It's very well conceived in think tanks that are out to undermine the best interest of the American people for power. We need to realize that the truth must never be feared. We should always speak it with bold moral conviction. There's a righteous way to do it, deliver it in love, but speak it we must. And beware of anybody that's censoring the truth or intimidating or harassing those who do. And we as military veterans can be really key in demonstrating that moral courage and that leadership to inspire other people to stand up and find their voice.
Particularly since we're not bashful, about doing it. And if you have a situation where people are spinning the work culture and you stand up and you basically counter it, I can guarantee you when you introduce yourself as a veteran, it won't be long before you'll have a battle buddy on your right and your left. And those 2 will become 10 and those 10 will become 100. But somebody has to be the one who steps up first. And that really is the responsibility of the veterans, because a lot of us dedicated most of our lives. And in some cases, we use several of our 9 lives up already. And we need to be the ones who are saying that should not be for naught. It should be something that we as veterans continue to protect, continue to challenge those who would destroy it. And whether it be politically at the national, state, local level, it needs to be done. And at some point in time, if it doesn't be done, we're all going to be mobilizing again, because there are enemies out there that would destroy us from within. So we get to the point where they can attack us externally as well. And the cartel on the southern border being funded by all of these outside interests and the corruption that they've created in terms of our NGOs is a huge threat to our national security. It needs to be taken as such. And veterans are the ones who have to stand up and make that case.
Well, I'm going to continue advocating for veterans' rights and advocating for the interests of veterans to step up and do the job that seems as though no one else is doing. I believe veterans have the courage. I'm not personally a veteran, but I am an ambassador for Veterans for America First. My father is a Vietnam veteran. I have nieces and nephews currently serving in all branches of the military, and I am a patriot. I feel as though advocating for children's interests and those of the downtrodden and forgotten, that's my mission. And y'all continue doing what you're doing. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing, and hopefully we can put an end to a lot of this mess in the near. We've got a lot of exciting news coming up with some announcements possibly tomorrow. And we might be in a better position in the near future to quash a lot of this evil nonsense. So did anyone have any other questions? Vlad, I see you're wanting to speak, or Forrest?
Absolutely. Let Forrest go first. I have one point I wanted to make to that.
Okay. There's one really heavy duty point that we have forgotten to mention on this recording, and that is the amount of fentanyl that is coming across our border. In August, we had an arrest in Albuquerque, over 1 million tablets, over 70 pounds of pure fentanyl, enough to kill every single American in the United States. And that was one bus. And I think that alone is an attack on this country.
By China.
Major national security breach and threat. Absolutely.
Yeah, these cartels are being funded by China. They found the raw materials for all this fentanyl originated in China, and now the cartels are trying to cut the Chinese businessmen out of the raw materials. So it's both.
40% of the pills are now testing hot. Imagine if you're going to take dope and you got a 40% chance of dying. That's just crazy.
It's an invasion. It's an attack. It's an act of war, in my opinion.
All right. To that end, I just want to end with just a short clip I want to show you guys. This was from our trip to the border some time ago here, our second trip, I believe. And this is where we brought a couple hundred people together and a couple dozen politicians from all over the country, okay? And we have completed the wall with, well, holding hands to form the rest of the wall. And as you see, there's Admiral Kubic right there. I could recognize him anywhere. So, and a lot of these guys are all wearing our stuff. A lot of them are running for office, and a lot of them are veterans running for office. So we wanted them to see firsthand what was happening at the border. And just in the short time that we were there, we saw people crossing the border from, many different directions and in caravans.
And this is a gap that would have been filled quickly if Biden hadn't shut us down.
Absolutely. And, we actually got a lot of our politicians to sign this Border Patrol hat as a promise to always uphold our border and security of our border. So one of these days, if anybody decides not to, we're going to keep this hat as a evidence on that. Okay. But absolutely, with everything that's happening, I think the border issue and human trafficking, they go hand in hand. Fentanyl and all of that aside, I think you guys are absolutely on the point. If we shut down the currency, the problem goes away. So again, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Well, I'm going to continue doing this on a daily, if not multi-daily interviews as fast as I can, call attention to all the major issues. Now we've gotten past the 2022 midterm elections. We are not going to slow down. We're going to keep focusing on 2024 and getting a unified front. So I've said it while I was on the campaign trail for the Georgia congressional seat. But this season was for flipping seats, and 2024 we might need to open up rhino season, because if we've got a rotten egg on one side, it's probably going to be on both sides. And what's worse than a wolf in sheep's clothing? We need to hold the people accountable for the morals and the principles that they say that they're for. Because we know the Democrats, they're open and obvious about how absurd they've been, and they'll stand behind it. I think that the rhinos need to have a second look. They're supposed to be endangered, and I don't think they live in swamps.